The Paternal Metaphor III, Part 2 of 4. Hence, it is insofar as the child takes on, and he must take on, but on the other hand, he only takes it on in a way that, in some crude way, in the reality of this discourse, first takes on the mother's desire, that he is open to this, to be able to come, him, to put himself in the position of the mother's metonymy, meaning to become what I have called for you the other day, her subjected. In a way, you have seen the displacement on which this is based, precisely in the thing that we have heard about, as it happens, as the primitive identification, and that consists exactly in this kind of exchange that means that the I of the subject came to the place of the mother as other, whilst the I of the mother became his own other. This is exactly what has happened in this kind of going up a notch on the little ladder of our diagram, which then comes into operation in this second phase. The central point, the pivotal point, the mediating point, or more exactly, the moment when the father appears as mediated by the mother in the Oedipus complex, is very precisely the one where he now makes himself felt as prohibitor. I have said that he is mediated here. He is mediated because it is as prohibitor that he is going to appear. Where? In the mother's discourse. I want you to take note here that in the same way as just now this mother's discourse was grasped in its crude state in the first stage of the Oedipus complex, here, in saying that it is mediated, that still does not mean that we are making the father's word intervene, which is what the mother as her own subject is doing. What that means is that this father's word effectively intervenes in what results in the form of the mother's discourse. Hence it would seem to be, at this moment here, less veiled than in the first stage. But it is certainly not completely revealed. This is what the use of the term mediated means in this context. To put it another way, at this stage he intervenes here, M, under the heading Message for Mother. Him, he is the speaker here, and what he says is a prohibition. It's a don't ... that is transmitted here at the message, at the level in which the child receives the message expected from the mother. It's a message on top of a message. And this particular form of a message on top of a message, of which, let me tell you to my very great surprise, that linguists do not distinguish it as such, which would have been of great interest in what we do in conjunction with linguists. A message on top of a message, it's the message of prohibition. This is not simply for the child, and already at this time you will not sleep with your mother. It is also for the mother. You will not reincorporate. And these are well-known forms of what is called the maternal instincts that are encountering an obstacle here. You will not reincorporate your progeny. Everyone knows that the primitive form of the maternal instinct manifests itself in certain animals, perhaps even more in humans, by reincorporating, as we elegantly put it, orally, that which came out the other side. This is very precisely what it is about. This prohibition comes through as such here, M. Just as it can be said that here, A, something is manifested that is precisely the father as other. And in principle, it is from here that the potentiality, the virtuality exists, salutary in the end, which is a result of, from this fact, that the child is profoundly called into question, undermined in his position as subjected. To put it another way, it is insofar as the mother's object of desire is called into question by the paternal prohibition. The paternal prohibition prevents the cycle from completely closing in on itself, i.e. from him purely and simply becoming the mother's object of desire, that the whole process that should normally finish there, i.e. the symbolic relationship with the other, already has this triplicity that there is in the relationship between the child and the mother, since it is not her that he desires, but her desire. There is already this ternary, it is already a symbolic relationship. Nevertheless, everything of the desire is called back into question from the moment when its first fastening, its first success, i.e. the discovery that, through the paternal prohibition, the mother's object of desire completely escapes and leaves the desire of the mother's desire in the child, le bec dans l'eau, i.e. left in the lurch. This second stage, a little less made of potentiality than the first, altogether tangible and perceptible, but essentially instantaneous, if you like, transitory. It is key, for in the end, this is what is at the heart of what can be called the deprivational moment of the Oedipus complex. It is insofar as the child is flushed out, her himself, and very much for her his own good, of this ideal position in which he and the mother could satisfy each other, of this functioning of his metonymic object. It is insofar as it is flushed out of there that the third relationship can be established, the one fruitful where he becomes something else. He becomes this other thing which I told you about last time, the one that comprises the identification with the father and the virtual heading of having what the father has. If I kind of rapidly brushed over the three phases of the Oedipus complex for you last time, it was so that I would not have to start from the beginning again today, or, to be precise, in order to have the time today to go over it again step by step. Let's stop for a moment here, and then after that we will go on to discussing homosexuality. It's almost a parenthesis, nevertheless it is important. It is extremely important to consider in what way the father intervenes at this moment here, in the dialectic of the Oedipus complex, because it is here, and you can see it more clearly in the last article that I did for the next issue of La Psychanalyse, on a question preliminary to any possible treatment of psychosis, which summarizes what I told you in the year when we discussed the Freudian structures of psychosis. The level of publication which that represents did not allow me to use this diagram here, which would have required too much explanation in that article. But when you have read this article, hopefully in the near future, you can look back at your notes of what I am going to show you now, and that consists in this: that insofar as the name of the father as symbolic function, the father at the level of what happens here between message and code, M and A, is precisely verworfen, foreclosed, such that there is not even here what I represented with a dotted line, i.e. that by which the father intervenes as the law, but in a way that is pure and simple, crude, insofar as a message of don't ... on top of the mother's message to the child, also as a totally crude source of a code that comes from beyond the mother, you can, on this wiring diagram of signifiers, see discernible and perfectly recognizable what happens when, from having been requested to make an essential detour, to make the name of the father respond there in its place, meaning where it cannot respond because it has never been there, Judge Schwaber sees emerge, very precisely in its place, this structure produced by the huge, real intervention of the father from beyond the mother, but absolutely not tolerated by him as lawmaker, which means that, at the most prolific point of his psychosis, Judge Schwaber hears what? Very exactly two fundamental kinds of hallucination that have never been, of course, singled out as such in the classic manuals. In order to understand something about hallucinations, it would be much better to read the remarkable and exceptional text written by a psychotic like Judge Schwaber than to read all the best psychiatric authors that have dealt with the question of hallucinations with, already prepared in their pocket, the infamous scholarly ladder learnt in philosophy class, sensation, perception without object, and other poppycock. On the contrary, Judge Schwaber himself distinguishes very clearly two orders of things. The voices that speak in the base language, the main aim of which, in speaking in this base language, is to teach the subject its own code through this very speech, i.e., that everything concerning it, every message he receives in base language, is at the same time made of words that, neological or not, they are in their own way, consist in teaching the subject what they are in a new code, something that literally reiterates a new world, a signifying universe. To put it another way, there is a series of hallucinations that are messages in a neo-code, hence something that presents itself as coming from the other. This is what is most terrifyingly hallucinatory, and in the form of messages about the code, constituted as such in this other. On the other hand, another form of messages that present themselves essentially as interrupted messages. Remember those little bits of phrases, namely he must ... now I want ... etc., which is to say the beginning of instructions, and very precisely in certain cases even actual proverbs. Finish the one that you have started ... and so on and so forth. In short, these messages that present themselves essentially as pure messages, instructions or interrupted instructions, as forces of pure inducement in the subject, equally perfectly locatable from the two dissociated sides, message M and code A, in the way the intervention of the father's discourse comes out when this something is abolished from the beginning and never has any way of being integrated into the subject's life, when this is precisely the very thing that creates coherence, the self-punishment of the father's discourse, i.e., that in which, having finished her his discourse, it comes back on her him, it punishes as law. For the next stage, which assumes that in normal conditions the father can come into play, we discussed what it concerns last time, i.e., that it is insofar as the father is going to intervene to give, insofar as he has it, what is at stake in phallic privation, and what has intervened as a central term in the evolution of the Oedipus complex, the three phases of the Oedipus complex. It's insofar as he is going to appear effectively as an act of giving, no longer from within the mother's acts, and hence still semi-veiled, but in the discourse. The mother herself, insofar as the father's message becomes the mother's message, becomes the message that allows and that authorizes, that is going to produce this something in relation to which you can clearly see that my diagram from last time means nothing other than this, that insofar as the father's message is incarnated as such, it can produce something that is this going up a notch on the diagram, i.e. that the subject can receive in the message from the father what he tried to receive from the mother's message. But here, via the going through, via the intermediary of the gift or of the permission given to the mother, meaning that what there is at the end of the day, and this is effectively achieved in the dissolution cycle of the Oedipus complex, he has this, that it is permitted for him to have a penis later. This is truly, as we said last time, having the title in the bag, having the credentials in his pocket. This also evokes an amusing historic quote. A woman, of whose fidelity the husband wanted to be certain, gave him a written certificate saying that she was faithful to him. After which she spread it about everywhere, remarking, "Ah, what a fine guarantee La Châtre has." Ah well, this La Châtre and our little castrated one, Châtre in French, are of the same order. They also have this fine guarantee at the end of the Oedipus complex, which is not nothing, since it is on the basis of this fine guarantee that, in what follows, will depend the fact that they can calmly presume, at least in the most fortunate cases, to have a penis. In other words, to be someone just like their own father. But it is precisely at this, in short, ambiguous stage, in which you can clearly see two versions in some way always susceptible to being reversed from one to the other, that there is something in some way abstract, at least dialectical, in this relationship that there is between the two terms that I have just talked to you about, i.e. the one where the father intervenes as prohibitor and depriver, and, on the other hand, the one where he intervenes as permissive and as giver, but giver at the level of the mother.